Well, good afternoon. As we've discussed here many times, we have made great progress as a community, as a city, working together to fight COVID-19 in our community, and we know that the number of new cases is definitely moving in the right direction. We've come so far thanks to the sacrifice and the patience of our residents and our businesses. The vast majority of people are doing the right thing and following public health advice. On the TTC, for example, we know from the latest survey of the system that 95% of the riders, the users of the TTC, were following the mandatory face covering rule last week. We also know that many businesses moved quickly to make sure that they were complying with the mandatory face covering bylaw in public indoor spaces, and that was what the bylaw covered. To help further fortify our city ahead of Stage 3, we will be bringing several measures to City Council this week to protect the health of our residents, to minimize the chances of new outbreaks, and all of that, of course, has meant and will continue to mean saving lives. And I'm delighted to be joined here today to address some of these measures that are going to be in front of City Council with you by the Deputy Mayor, Michael Thompson, who's the Chair of Economic Development, because a lot of this, of course, has an impact one way or another on business, and also by the Chair of the Board of Health, Councillor Joe Cressy, again, where we've relied on the expert advice of some of the people that he works with to help us to devise these different things that we're putting forward today. They're contained in a report that is being released today by the city staff, and they detail what further action the city itself can take to make sure we're encouraging people to do everything they can to stop the spread of the virus. I believe these measures, which have been fully recommended by our Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Davila, and Toronto Public Health itself, are all necessary in order to protect residents. The advice comes, as it has throughout this pandemic, from the medical and health professionals, not from politicians. And the advice with respect to these proposed additional measures is very simple. These measures will save lives and will help us to control the spread of COVID-19. As you know, discussions with the province are ongoing about some of these same health measures which would help to protect Torontonians as we move into Stage 3. We know the province is actively considering these, and the discussions have been very constructive and very positive. But we also know that City Council is meeting this week and won't meet again until into the fall, and the City Council itself can take action in some, though not all, of these areas, as the report indicates, hence the request made of the province by way of a letter we sent off last week. I know Premier Ford is just as concerned as I am, and as we all are, about a second wave and the disastrous impact that a return to a more stringent lockdown would have on the health of our residents and on the restart of the Ontario economy, the Toronto economy, and the Ontario economy. We've seen in other jurisdictions that further reopening can lead to increased outbreaks of COVID-19 and growing case count numbers, and we do not want to go in that direction. We have been working collaboratively with the province to strike the right balance. So we, myself, Deputy Mayor Thompson, Councillor Cressy, and our council colleagues are ready to take action that will be complementary to any further action the province takes, and I suspect we'll have some indication of that quite shortly. Our city staff have prepared bylaws for those measures that we believe the Council has the authority to legislate based, once again, on Dr. Davila's advice as our Chief Medical Officer of Health. And all of that is set out in very plain language in the supplementary report that has been released today and that will go in front of the Council tomorrow. And it is also based, of course, on legal advice coming from our city solicitor as to our authority to legislate in different areas. The council measures, which would of course be superseded by any action the province takes, focus on a number of areas, including, first, bars and restaurants. The medical officer recommends that council require that patrons be seated at all times unless entering, exiting, traveling to and from the washroom, or paying. The present requirement in place as part of the Stage 3 regulatory framework applies only while people are actually eating or drinking. We would also require establishments to maintain a client log with a name and contact information for one person minimum in each party, along with the date, the check-in and check-out times, and the table number. We would store these logs, would require them to be stored for a period of 30 days, after which time the information can be destroyed. And we would permit local public health units to access this information when tracing contacts of someone with COVID-19 who was a patron of that same restaurant or bar or otherwise for public health purposes pursuant to the Health Protection and Promotion Act. It would also require operators of food and drink establishment to implement COVID-19 screening protocols for staff, such as completion of a screening questionnaire prior to the commencement of their shifts. The second area that this series of proposals going in front of City Council addresses is the one that relates to masks in common areas of apartments and condominiums. Our staff have drafted a bylaw to make face coverings mandatory in the common areas of condominiums and apartments. Many apartments and condos have already done this or have strongly recommended it to their tenants. As mayor, I've received considerable communication, as I suspect have my colleagues, on this from tenants and residents of condos asking for this measure, which, again, has been recommended by our medical officer of health, our professional, our doctor for all the people of the City of Toronto. The Greater Toronto Apartment Association and individual condo boards and landlords have indicated this proposed measure would enhance their ability to enforce it if the city was clear in a bylaw that face coverings are required. So we will take action on this as well at the council meeting taking place today and tomorrow. And then finally, social distancing bylaws. Our staff are recommending extending the social distancing bylaws that I enacted and which were later affirmed by the City Council, and extending them to at least the time of the September council meeting towards the end of September. These have been important measures to help ensure that social distancing is maintained at parks and beaches and public spaces. This extension will ensure that this bylaw remains in effect through the summer and into Stage 3. And I hope it will also serve, all of these measures for that matter, as a reminder that we still have to take precautions and keep our distance from others. Throughout this pandemic, we have worked to follow public health advice to make sure that we are doing everything we can to stop the spread of COVID-19. While it might be argued that rules already in place should preclude this activity, I cannot let this opportunity pass without pleading with people to avoid holding or attending more informal backyard-type social gatherings which don't comply with health regulations. I think by now people know the numbers and the circles and the bubbles that are involved in what does comply with the advice and the regulations that have been put forward to stop the spread of this virus and which ones don't. I inquired with our officials this morning on additional measures which could help us manage beaches better, and was informed that there really weren't additional measures that they could implement within our legislative jurisdiction, especially given the fact we presently have the power to close beaches. But as I said yesterday, that is something that I would be reluctant to see happen, to see us use the power to close beaches, because it then sees us deny everyone the use of these treasured places during a hot summer. Beyond that, such beach closures could in fact end up promoting more of these informal backyard gatherings, which won't help make things better either. I do not in any way, nor do my colleagues, control or direct enforcement efforts on the beaches or with regard to backyard parties on the part of either the police or bylaw officers. Law enforcement is not something that is directed by politicians. I well remember the division of opinion which accompanied, for example, the closure of High Park during the cherry blossoms. Some people, and this was done for reasons strictly of public health on the advice of our public health experts, some people thought it was too much, others thought it was too little, so you had to do what you thought was right, always based on the advice of our medical and public health professionals. But I will say, as we approach Stage 3, and with the stakes of renewed spread so high, that I hope our enforcement officers are taking careful note of places which are repeat hotspots for crowd scenes that are in violation of the rules. And speaking for myself, I would apply little to zero tolerance for large backyard mega parties of the type that we saw in Brampton, complete, believe it or not, with things like valet parking. This is not a spontaneous pop-up event we're dealing with here. We simply can't afford to take that risk. These measures, which I hope Council will support and approve, will continue that action on our behalf and on our part, and ensure that we continue to protect the health of our residents and the health of our local economy, both of which are very important. And on that note, I would like to invite Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson, Chair of Economic Development, to speak.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mayor Tory, certainly for your leadership to the city's response to COVID-19. I think that based on the results so far, your leadership has just been absolutely stellar. And I'd also like to thank the Board of Health Chair, Councillor Cressy, for his leadership as well. Thank you both for the amazing leadership that we provide to the City of Toronto. As Chair of the City's Economic and Community Development Committee, I have been working hard to help businesses across our city to restart and reopen. I have seen firsthand how much Toronto's businesses have suffered over the past number of months. I believe that the measures that the Mayor have spoken about, the measures that we're outlining here today, are our best chance to support our businesses and to protect our economy while keeping our people safe. And while reopening will entail some restrictions and new practices, to reopen successfully and sustainably, we need to do this right. We cannot afford to endure further delays or, in fact, having to risk further shutdown again. Failure to sustain our reopening will be a great disadvantage to our economy. So through these measures and the cooperation of businesses across the city, we will expand their ability to operate. Well, maybe not to the full extent of their operation before COVID, but enough to get them through the coming months until we can put this pandemic in the rearview mirror. Today, we are making it clear that we will do everything we can as a city government to address the risk to our economy, to the health and well-being of our residents. By enacting the proposals presented today, we will establish extra precaution when it comes to reopening our city to better protect our economy, our businesses, and our residents. Businesses need to open their doors and to keep them open. They cannot afford further closure or simply to close down again. They have to continue to open. These measures are designed to help. While they are somewhat restrictive in some sense, the fact of the matter is that this restriction will actually help you to sustain and actually help you with your businesses. But, you know, they also have to understand that to stay open, they need to follow the measures that we're putting in place to protect their customers as well as to protect their employees. Through my countless discussions with the business community, I know that the vast majority of businesses are prepared to do the right thing, to work with us to get to the next stages as safety as possible. Is at the end of the day, it's around safety. We have to put health and safety ahead of business. And business is very important, the economy is important, but we also want to ensure that we do the right things to protect the customers for those businesses and the employees for the businesses. So I look forward to the discussions and the measures that will be brought forward to council for us to, as the mayor has indicated, to make a decision, because we are not going to be here for another month or so. We will come back to council around September, October, and so we need to ensure that we support the measures that are being put in place to help businesses, so businesses can actually help their customers, their employees, as well as to help to ensure that they can continue to stay open. We've come a far way to this point. We've done a great job. The leadership of the mayor and members of council and Councillor Cressy has been stellar. We've worked hard from an economic development perspective to help businesses, and I know businesses have endured. We have a way to go yet before we conquer and we can see COVID in our rearview mirror. We have to put these measures in place to help and protect us. And now I'd like to invite the Board of Health Chair, Councillor Cressy, to speak. Councillor Cressy.
Well, thank you, Mayor Tory, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Since day one, we committed to two things in regards to COVID-19. First, as a city, that we would do absolutely everything within our control to protect our residents. Absolutely everything, always. And second, that our response would at all times be guided by evidence and the best possible public health advice. We did that when we locked down our city. We did that when we developed a data-driven dashboard to guide our reopening. And we're doing that again here today by asking City Council to follow our Medical Officer of Health's advice and to implement additional measures to protect our residents when Phase 3 reopening occurs in our city. Listen, responding to a pandemic is challenging even when you know what you're up against. Responding to a pandemic with a brand new virus, with no known vaccine, no treatment, no developed antibodies, and constantly evolving science, well, this is frankly unprecedented. And so in that context, we look to the experts, we look to the science, and we look importantly to other jurisdictions, both to their successes as well as their struggles. And so here's what we've learned. We know that mask usage in indoor crowded settings works. That's why we're proposing a mask bylaw for common areas in condos and apartment buildings. We know that physical distancing works. That's why we're proposing extending the physical distancing bylaw for parks, beaches, and public spaces. And we also know that bars have been a problematic space for virus spread in cities across Canada and around the world. That's why we're proposing a series of proven measures to make them safer for the people who visit them, but also for the people who work there. As we move forward, we've made a decision at all times to be guided by experts. And so in preparing these measures, we've consulted extensively with the medical officer of health and our city solicitor, and we're also working closely with the provincial government to coordinate on these enhanced measures. When it comes to Phase 3, the reality is that reopening means learning to live with COVID still circulating. It also means managing and mitigating risk at the same time. We simply, we can't stay locked in our homes forever. The social and economic consequences are far too severe, but nor should we accept a drastic spike in cases in the event of a second wave. A cautious, a comprehensive, and a proactive reopening approach. That's our commitment. Now, this has been an exceptionally challenging time, more than 6 months, in fact, and to the residents of our city, you've been through a lot. You stayed home when we asked you to, you went outside and practiced physical distancing when we encouraged you to, you stopped playing in restaurants, getting your hair cut, going to restaurants. You've done a lot, but we're not quite done yet. COVID-19 has tested our city, and you, our residents, have risen to the test time and time again. We will get through this. In fact, we are getting through this. And when we do, we will come out of this stronger and more resilient than before. I'd now like to turn the floor back over to Mayor Tory, and we can open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mayor Tory, Deputy Mayor Thompson, and Councillor Cressy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We will now open the floor to questions. As a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up. All three speakers will be available to the media. First up, we have Ashley Legasic from News Talk 1010. Go ahead, Ashley.
Hi, thank you so much, Mayor Tory, for taking my question. From what you said today, it sounds like the only option for limiting excessive crowding on beaches would be to close them, which you've been very clear you don't want to do. But let's say we see massive crowds again at beaches this week and this weekend. How much longer until the bullet finally has to be bitten and beaches would have to close?
Well, it's hard to know that. I think what we would encourage our enforcement officers to do is to, step up even further the process of education. But, in the end, you can have as many enforcement people as you want. You can have them doing education, ticketing, anything you like. If people made decisions on their own that they were going to avoid those crowd scenes because they knew it was not in the best interest of public health, that's the best thing that can happen. And I've said this before, it isn't that difficult to either eyeball as you drive up to a beach, with the exception of the one that's on the island, or just know how many tickets have been sold to go across on the island ferry to know some of those beaches might be overcrowded and to stay away from those places. We're blessed with so many places to go, even including beaches. We don't just have two. We have multiple beaches. We have many, many parks. We have other places that people can go. So I would just urge them to do that. We will see what happens with respect to the decisions made by the enforcement people. We're adding resources, including people like the Marine Unit, and I would hope we never have to take the decision to close the beaches. But if that is what it takes to stop incredible crowd scenes, if it gets to that, well then that's obviously something that's going to be in front of us and in front of our officials.
Thank you. And my next question is about stage 3 itself. Obviously, it's very good news to see Toronto only had 6 new cases today. But do you think if a stage 3 announcement for Toronto came tomorrow, the city would be ready and residents would be responsible enough to head into stage 3?
Well, I might ask Councillor Cressy to comment on this as well, but I can just say this to you. The work that has been done by public health and by the different departments of the city government to inspect playgrounds and to develop guidelines and do all the kinds of things that are a necessity for being ready for stage 3, that work has largely been done. And so the whole objective was to make sure that when the government of Ontario lifted the order, we'd be in a position to move fairly quickly to get things done. So a lot of the restaurants, I think, are well informed as to what the future requirements will be and so on. I think the people are ready, but with a few exceptions, and it's the kind of people that are holding these crazy parties, and they don't really care, I don't think, whether we're in stage 1, 2, 6, or 11. They just seem to be insistent upon doing what is only described as irresponsible behavior. And so I think we're going to have to really rely on maybe some peer pressure and just some common sense to prevail here so that we can get through stage 3 and on to back to a normal kind of existence. Joe, did you want to talk a little bit about all the work the Board of Health's been doing with stakeholders and others?
Certainly. As part of our Office of Recovery and Rebuild, we have a unit dedicated within Toronto Public Health that has been working tirelessly for months to prepare for reopening for our current Phase 2 plans, but certainly as we work towards Phase 3. I think we all have to recognize that as part of reopening, this COVID-19 is still circulating. And so as part of reopening, we have to mitigate and manage risk. And that's where a lot of the enhanced protocols and guidelines, whether it's for playgrounds that have been developed or whether it's for bars that we're looking to put in place at this council meeting, all of these measures are critical because until there's a vaccine, this is the reality. But I think I would also note that the measures we're outlining here today for bars and restaurants, for mask usage in condos and apartments, extending the physical distancing bylaw, all of these are enhanced measures to ensure that if and when we move to Phase 3, Toronto's in the best possible position and also to help us prevent a significant second wave.
Want to say a word about business at all, Michael, just in terms of their readiness to deal
Yes.
with the new reality here?
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, indeed. We have been preparing for, obviously, the varying stages. And it's really important to recognize what has actually been going on in the city, as the Mayor had described, and Councillor Cressy has described it. We have been preparing for recovery. We're not just simply waiting until we're told that we're ready to be open, that we then start that work. All through this pandemic process, there has been work being done, obviously, Board of Health. The Mayor has been doing a lot of work. Economic development. Our team have been working tirelessly with the business community for the eventuality with respect to when the reopening takes place. So we haven't just been relaxing and hoping that we would be ready. We've actually been preparing to be ready. And in fact, I would say that we are ready. And let me just say this final thing. When you compare the preparedness and the readiness of this city, and I'm talking about all elements of this city, and yes, the Mayor has described some bad apples and some bad actors. We get that in all situations. I will say that the level of cooperation and preparedness by all of the Toronto residents and the businesses have actually been very active, and I've been very, very pleased with respect to the response and the preparedness and the energy in which people are prepared to implement new measures to ensure that customers are protected as well as workers being protected. So we are ready, and we have been preparing for this stage to come forward.
Thank you, Ashley. Next up, we have Sabrina Jonas from CBC. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Hi there. Thanks so much for taking my question. Mayor Tory, in regard to the NHL moving into Phase 4 and the Leafs playing again, for fans who usually gather in the square or at a bar to watch, what do you say to those fans who might be tempted to get together to watch?
The best thing you could do is get together with the people you've been living with and associating with in your circle and do it in your own bubble. Don't try to come near the bubbles that the NHL has set up, because if you haven't been there, I was near one yesterday for an Indigenous ceremony. It's fenced off. People are not going to be welcome to gather because there are restrictions on gatherings in Maple Leaf Square, for example. That's a hardship for us because we're all fans that want to cheer on our team, especially the Leafs. But right now, we just have to say, enjoy it on television. That's why they're putting it on. Enjoy it with your own family. And please do not go to large gatherings or other kinds of places, whether it's at Maple Leaf Square or anywhere else, because that is going to, take us in the wrong direction when it comes to fighting COVID-19.
Sabrina, do you have a follow-up?
No follow-up. Thanks so much.
Okay, that's it for today. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Sounds good.